Bienvenidos, Ushamdeed, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the Spring 2023 semester taking the CTS-233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's DEVASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course. And in this video tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at Lab 3.1.12, where we're going to explore Python development tools. And we're going to be focusing on part 2, which is simply 2 commands, and then part 3. And what you're going to learn in this video is how we can create Python virtual environments. And you might be wondering, well, why would I want to do that? Well, the entire premise behind a Python virtual environment is we create a virtual environment which is persistent, right? We can enter it and exit it, but that virtual environment, think of it as just like a virtual machine. It's going to have its own libraries installed, and maybe we want to create an environment like that for web-based work. Or maybe we want to create a virtual Python environment for mathematical type work, and I'm going to show you examples for both of those. So let's go ahead and dive in right now and knock out part 2 and part 3 of Lab 3.1.12. To do so, I'm going to transition over to our course DevASC virtual machine. Now, everything you see me doing here, if you do not have the virtual machine, you can do on your host operating system using the python.org integrated development learning environment, or if you're comfortable installing that and using it from a terminal window on your host operating machine, you can do that as well. So let's pull the terminal up. The icon is right here. You can double click it. I've already staged it because I've made the text a little bit larger, right, so that we can see kind of what's going on here, and that's probably big enough right there. All right, so the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to review how do we check to see what version of Python we're running. Now, you'll notice that different from the first few videos that I made prior to doing the sudo apt-get update and then upgrade is that I'm now running Python 3.8.10. Again, this is not a significant difference. There's a minor change because we were 3.8.2, so that Python's, the sudo apt-get upgrade brought us to Python 3.8.10. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with this and we'll be good. We can also check to see where the Python 3 binary is located. So user bin Python. In fact, I could cd down to user bin and say ls-lai and throw some options in here on Python 3. And there's the information on Python 3, and you can see that now you see the L here in that first bit position. And that first bit position is the file type. And this is indicating that this is a symbolic link. And I've always loved how Linux uses this dash arrow to make it look like it's pointing to, because basically when you type Python 3, it is symbolically linked to Python 3.8. And so when I type in Python 3, it basically points me and says, yeah, no, run Python 3.8, right? So it's, you could think of it as like a pointer, right? But it's technically we call it a symbolic link. All right, well, that was really part 2 of the lab, is they just have you review those 2 commands so that you can see where the Python 3 binary is located and what version you're currently running. So now we're going to transition on to part 3 of the lab. And part 3 of the lab is going to have us start out by using the pip command or pip3 command. But before we do that, we want to create, and actually if I was to say pip3 freeze, and this is a command that you're going to see in this lab often, this is going to print up all of the different libraries and functionality that I have in the main Python installation, right? And this is the installation that when you say Python 3 -v, right? When I say Python 3 -V, that is the Python version that when I say pip3 freeze, that it's printing out all of the libraries and functionality that are part of that Python installation. So why would I want to create a virtual Python environment? And so they want us to move down into the labs, and I think it's DevNet, and then is it Python? So they want us to move all the way down here into our home directory. So if we're in the home directory, you're going to go to cd labs devnet source /Python. Again, you can make this directory structure on your local system if you're using an Ubuntu virtual machine, perhaps. And so what they want us to do here is they want us to create a Python virtual environment. Well, it's super simple to do that. I'm going to say Python, Python 3 minus m, and we're going to say venv, and then we give the name of the environment that we're creating. And so I'm going to follow along with the lab. They want us to use dev_fun, so we'll go ahead and use dev_fun. Now you'll see it pauses for a second there because what it's doing is it's creating the directory in which all of the environmental configuration files that are going to be required when we source and activate this virtual environment, all of that information is in the dev_fun directory. So let's go into the dev_fun directory and let's look around here. What is in here? What just got created? So we've got a bin or a binary directory in which when we go in there, and actually we don't even have to cd in there, I can just say ls-l /bin, right? And so there's the files that are in there. You can see that we have some symbolic links at the very bottom there that are pointing us to where our version of Python 3 is located. And you can see here, it's kind of a rabbit hole. So if you typed in Python, it's going to send you to Python 3, and then Python 3 is going to send you to user bin Python. So it's kind of like, following a treasure map here, that we ultimately end up with user bin Python 3, which is the main executable. You can see that these activate commands, if I was running the C shell or the fish shell, this is two shells we won't be running, that they've got the activate scripts here to set up and facilitate or allow you to have a Python virtual environment. And again, the key with the virtual environment is think of it as being mutually exclusive, independent from the main Python installation. So if I create a virtual environment and I go in there and I just blow stuff up, hey, no worries. Just like a virtual machine, you're doing it inside that little hermetically sealed bubble, right, that is the virtual machine. And so I could just create another virtual machine or another virtual Python instance. Now, we've created dev_fun. We've seen what's in here. You can see that pip is also in here as well, right? So let's cd back up here to the main Python directory, and I'll say ls-l so you can see what we've got in here. And that dev_fun directory, that's going to be the key. Now remember, I can start this and then exit out of it, and it's still going to be there, right? So that virtual environment is going to be there. So if, for instance, I wanted to say Python 3 minus m venv, and maybe you want to create a virtual environment for the course, right? So let's say CTS-233. All right, did we get that directory? We did, so now I've got that virtual environment. Let's see, for the name, can I put a dash in there? And maybe you want to make sure you have in the section number for our course. Is that going to work? That is absolutely going to work. So I've just created 3 virtual environments that I can activate and then work in. And again, maybe you want to do a virtual environment on web development, and we're going to install Django, and we're going to install requests, and we're going to install JSON, right? Maybe we want to do that. Or what if I wanted to do like work on math stuff and install Pynum, other modules, libraries like that. So I can say math dev if I'm going to be doing some programming in there and I only want to install sort of the math centric. And I'm going to show you how to do that, right? Because we want to do a little bit deeper dive. I want to go beyond just what the lab is showing us so that hopefully we get an understanding of how these virtual environments are going to be of value. All right. So now all I have to do, if I clear my screen and say ls-l, all I have to do in order to enter or start up the Python virtual environment is to say source, the name of the directory we created, right? The name of the virtual environment, and dev_fun is the one we're going to look at, bin activate. And that's it. So you basically source the activation and watch what happens to my prompt, right? Because this is your key here. You can see that there is the beginning of my command line interface prompt. When I activate the virtual environment, look at what happens here. The front end of my command line prompt changes, right? The front end of the command line prompt is going to change. And that is the indicator that we are now in the Python virtual environment, right? That's the key. Okay, so what is it that we can do from within the Python virtual environment. So maybe I want to get out of it. I can say deactivate, and then I'm out. And the reason you know you're out is because we no longer have the name of the Python virtual environment at the front end of the command line interface prompt, right? So to get into the virtual environment that you just created, we source and activate. To get out of it, you just deactivate. Simple as that. All right, well, let's dive in. Let's get in that. Let's activate the dev-fun Python virtual environment. So that pip3 freeze command. Now, it's an interesting command. I would have preferred if it was pip3 maybe list, right? Or lib list or something like that. But pip3 freeze, remember, I ran that before in the main environment, and we got a huge list of all the things, all the libraries that are in that main environment, right? And all that functionality that's there in the main Python installation. Well, this is a virtual Python environment, and we don't have much of anything here. So we need to install some things. So as I had mentioned, for example, let's say that you were interested in doing a web environment of some kind, right? So what could we do? Well, we would say pip3, and remember, I'm not in at the Python interactive interpreter yet, right? I'm still at the CLI prompt here. So I could say pip3 install requests, right? And we're going to install the request, which is HTTP for humans. We're going to go ahead and install that library to get all of that functionality here. So now when I say pip3 freeze, you can see that in my virtual environment, we've brought in some dependencies along with requests 2.28.2, right? Well, what if I also wanted to do some Django stuff, right? So I could say pip3 install, and let's say Django. And so it's going to install Django, right? And remember, this is only in the Python virtual environment. So now if I say pip3, I want pip3 freeze, what do we have installed here in our virtual environment? All right, so we got Django. Again, we get some other dependencies or add-ons that get put in there as well, like backports and things like that. So that is the virtual environment. And you can see that it's different from when we first started it. When we first started it and ran pip3 freeze, there was nothing in there. So now let's do this. Let me go ahead and say deactivate. And let's watch what happens here. So now I'm no longer in the Python virtual environment. So let me clear my screen, and let's say pip3 freeze. Yeah, you can tell, right? Because not only does it not say dev fun in parentheses here at the front end of the prompt, it's now listing out all of this other stuff, right? All of that additional functionality it's just part of the main Python install for 3.8.10, right? So if what I told you is true about the virtual environment being available to me again, I should be able to say source devfun slash, and now I'm forgetting the path name here. Whoops, let's go back there. Yeah, so devfun bin activate. So source devfun bin activate, and I'm back in the environment. What happens when I say pip3 freeze, right? Did it delete all of those additional libraries that I added in? Did it wipe it totally clean? Or can I pop in and out of this development environment at will and have access to the things that I want, right? So if this was going to be a web type development environment, I would add in all of the web stuff. If this was going to be a math sort of based environment, so let's say pip3 install, and I think it's pynum. So can we install pynum? Yeah, and there it is, successfully installed pynum, right? So, and again, there's other math-specific libraries that you could install into your virtual environment, but this is exactly how you would do that. So let's go ahead, clear the screen. Let me deactivate, right? So I'm now back in my main CLI, and they want us to type in this Python 3-m pip freeze. Now, excuse me, this is, while we're invoking Python 3, we use pip instead of pip3, right? So there's a quick note they have there. So when I say Python 3, right, we're going to see the same thing. In fact, if I was to run this, and let's pipe it through WC-L, and all that's doing is it's doing a count of the lines. So how many lines do we see? There's 182 lines there, right? So 182 libraries, part of the main installation. If I say pip3 freeze, instead of saying python 3-m pip freeze, if I say pip3 freeze and then run it through wc-l, let's see, are we seeing the same thing? Yeah, so those are just two different ways that you can get the information. I prefer just pip3 freeze, right? So then what they want us to do is to check to see, and this is where we're going to use the grep command. Again, this pipe here is we're running this command here, which we know produces these 182 lines. And then we're sending it down a pipeline, right? And that's why we call this the pipe. And we're sending it to the grep utility. And the grep utility is going to grep for the requests module. And there it is. And you can see here we're running 222.0. I think we were 222.8 or 228.2 back in the virtual environment. But again, you can see that the requests module is here. And we've got the different tools that, or I should say the different libraries that would be required to support that functionality. All right, so this is the end of part 3. Again, I want to chop this up into digestible chunks. And now in the next video, we're going to take a look at what they refer to as sharing your virtual environment. But I want to clarify that it's not that if I'm on this machine and I'm doing work, that someone on some other machine who has a virtual environment with the same name is able to share what I'm doing. And so it doesn't work like that. So they use the word share, but it's really how can somebody else configure a virtual environment identical to the one that you have configured? And that's what we're going to dive into in part 4. All right, so that wraps up part 2 and part 3. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the course in week number 2. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.